All right, in this video, we're going to compare the EBOX 2.0 with the Tuttio Soleil. I know a lot of you have been asking about this video. Should I get the Tuttio? Should I get the EBOX? I keep responding to that question, but I think doing an actual video where you could see them side by side makes the most sense. We got Sully over here. He's going to give his take as well. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of what kind of bike you want. Now, first off, the EBOX 2.0 is modded slightly, so we're not comparing both stock versions. The Tuttio is still stock, but we will talk about what the stock version was like. We're going to start with the design and build. So the Tuttio is orange and black, nice colorway, very partial to that one. Yeah, and it looks great right out of the box. I just, minimal branding and the orange wheels are really nice. And then with the EBOX, you do get multiple color options because you could choose the stickers that go on the plastics. So slightly more variations when you go with the EBOX versus the Tuttio.
Both these bikes come with 14-inch front wheels and 12-inch rear wheels wrapped in some aggressive dirt tires. This one we did swap out to a less aggressive, more dual sport rear, but nonetheless, they're still off-road tires.
Now there are some differences with the brakes as well. We did upgrade our rear brake to a Magura MT7.
So after swapping from the 2-piston to the 4-piston on the EBOX 2.0, there's definitely a lot more modulation in the brake to where the 2-piston was more so an on-off switch. Either you pulled it hard enough to stop you or you'd pull it and it would just drag. This definitely is a huge upgrade in stopping power for this bike. And then moving over to the Tuttio, the Moto brakes are a personal favorite of mine. I would put them on any bike that weighs, close to 100 pounds or more. Mountain bike brakes are for mountain bikes. You as a rider, if you weigh 150 plus the bike's 100, that's 250 pounds a very small mountain bike brake is trying to stop. The Moto brakes just have better heat dispersion, thicker pads, thicker rotors, and all these things come into play for cooling on the actual braking system.
Next is performance and power. So the Tuttio Soleil, it's interesting because the motor is actually covered by this panel over here, and I actually haven't removed this yet, but the motor is 1500 watt rated, 3000 watt peak versus the stock EBOX motor, which is 2000 watt rated, 3000 watt peak.
They're pretty similar. They have very similar characteristics when you have a good tune on them. The EBOX right out the box, the tune is a little spicy. It takes a lot of adjusting to get it to where you want it, and even then still it's really touchy on the throttle.
On the stock version, you have the analog controls over here, versus if you get the Tuttio, you do have to purchase a Bluetooth dongle, which would connect to the far driver. So yeah, you do have, I guess, more parameters or more digital parameters to work with through the app, but you would have to buy the dongle, whereas you can just automatically tune this right out of the box. The Tuttio comes with a 48 volt, 21 amp hour battery, and the EBOX comes with a 60 volt, 18.2 amp hour battery. Definitely
an advocate for 60 volt. But the controller also plays a massive part in that, and if the controller can't create a smooth enough tune, then it doesn't matter how much voltage you're running. The 48 volt in the Tuttio is very smooth and controlled. Right out the box, there's no modifications really needed. It's nice to be able to have that Bluetooth dongle to be able to adjust it a little bit more to your liking, but even straight out the box, it's just a very linear power bike, to where the EBOX definitely right out the gate hits like full power and then tapers down throughout the throttle curve.
And top speed, they're both sort of rated over 30 miles per hour. So the rear of the Tuttio has this large 60-tooth sprocket.
Yeah, and if you lower the count of the teeth on that sprocket, you will get more top end out of it.
Yeah, and it's using, I guess, traditional, what kind of chain is this?
Definitely not 420, it's smaller than 420 chain, that's for sure. Bigger than a TF8, but smaller than 420.
It's a bike chain. And then versus the EBOX,
which is a TF8, it looks like. That is a very, very, very small chain. So with the EBOX chain setup, you're probably going to end up stretching the chain a lot more frequently and having to replace it a bit more frequently, to where the Soleil has a more rugged chain that I don't think it would stretch for the amount of power that it has for a very long time, I think you would be hard pressed to have to swap that one.
You know, the Tuttio, for me at least, as someone who really can't wheelie, it's pretty forgiving as like a beginner bike to learn how to wheelie versus like the EBOX. I think if you're more experienced, it'll be a lot easier for you to control, especially, you know, with the stock controller.
The stock tune on this is definitely going to take a bit more adjusting to get it to your preferences, to where I feel like just out the box, this is just a very forgiving tune and just about anyone would be able to learn.
I do think the 48 volts plays a part in that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, so voltage only means so much. If the controller has a crappy tune, then, or if you can't get it dialed in exactly, like if you don't have the parameters to make it exactly how you want it, sometimes that can be the make it or break it point for you to feel comfortable on the bike.
All right, next let's talk about comfort and control. So the Soleil has a kind of a wide moto style seat, kind of goes all the way to the, you know, from the back to the front of the body, and it's pretty comfortable. I think the cushion is not bad. At least I find like when I'm sitting on it, I have just more room to play with in terms of like how I like to balance on it. The EBOX 2 seat is very similar. It's just a little bit more narrow and maybe a little slicker. And there is some high density foam in it. It's stiffer than what I thought it would be. I think that could actually be solved with like tuning your rear monoshock and potentially wrapping this seat or like adding some more cushioning.
One thing that we didn't mention about the suspension on this bike is it is air adjustable. So there is, I know you can't see it, but up in here there is a little air fill, and we haven't taken off the shock yet, but when we do, we're gonna pump that up and we are gonna see if it makes it any better for someone our body weight, because when it comes down to it, the shock on the Soleil is a lot stiffer, and if depending on your body size and weight, you know, and what you're gonna do with it, you kind of have to make the decision on what kind of suspension you'd want to choose. Coming from someone who is 150 pounds, so no matter what I do to this, putting my whole weight on it, I'm not hitting the bump stop on the shock. And then if we move over to this, I'm hitting almost the bottom of the shock on there. Ow. Yeah, it's pretty much bottoming it out, but still has more threads to be adjusted on the collar, and then also we can put some more air in it, so it might equal out to be the exact same.
Now with the front suspension fork, you do have some adjustment knobs on the EBOX.
Yeah, very good front suspension on both bikes, I think. Yeah, there's no adjustment on the Soleil, but it is also still a very, very good front shock.
The analog controls on the stock EBOX are pretty straightforward. You know, you turn a knob.
Yep, there's two knobs and they have two different jobs, and it's pretty easy to dial it in.
Versus the Tuttio, getting it connected to the app is pretty simple, but once you're in the app, you got to know what you're doing. I think if you're a tech savvy rider, you'd like programming a controller is no big deal. If you're not, then analog controls make the most sense.
Analog controls are the most simplistic way that I've ever seen an e-bike be tuned, and I haven't seen it on any other really bikes besides the EBOX bikes.
It's popular with like people who can wheelie, you know, stunt riders.
Yeah, when you're stunting, it's more so a feeling than just putting a number on a screen. You're not like a tech guy, you're just kind of doing adjustments until it feels how you want it to feel.
Yeah, I think I even noticed that with the dragster when we brought it to Chicago.
Yeah.
It's like the challenge to make it work was like exciting for some people.
Correct. Yeah, some people just love to just mess with the tune.
Final thoughts, you know, for me, I think the Tuttio is, you know, it's only 48 volts, but it's good for beginners, you know, it's good for beginners who don't mind 48 volts. It's a little bit larger than the EBOX, and if you don't mind tuning, it's actually a pretty cool option. I think the EBOX is perfect for anyone who has experience with like stunt riding. I think you'll love it a lot. It just has more raw power, torque, and again, the tactile tuning experience with the analog controls.
Right, and I mean, I think if you had like a really small backyard, but you were able to make like a little dirt track back there, realistically, the power that comes out of this one from the factory, you would probably have more fun with than the Tuttio. But if you are just trying to learn bike control, you're going to have a lot more control over the throttle curve of this bike, of the Soleil.
We've kind of did the whole first ride impression thing. It's more about hop on this bike and then hop on that bike, like one after the other, so go for it.
I mean, I've ridden this bike before, so I'm definitely very used to it. You know, the brakes are always there when you need them. Big moto brakes. good suspension. Yeah, everything feels super quality. I mean, other than the shock making a little bit of noise, but it's, you know, just a little bit more lubrication. Fix that, no problem. Ride's smooth, throttle is linear. Tires feel good, handling's good. There's no binding or any type of resistance in the handlebars when you're trying to turn, which is really important for a beginner because it's just a very beginner-friendly bike. But yeah, definitely a much more controlled bike for someone that wants to learn to do stunts. It's very linear and easy. Although I somehow have an easier time doing sit-downs on this one than knee knockers. But overall, very solid bike. So now let's hop on over to the EBOX. Granted, this one's not 100% factory. We did detune it a little bit to try and replicate factory power as much as possible, but obviously the delivery of the power is different because of the far driver versus the factory controller. So right away after hopping off of that onto this, you can definitely tell the suspension is much softer on this bike, which hopefully we can remedy with a few minor adjustments. But yeah, definitely a much softer suspension. The front feels about the same, but the rear shock is definitely much softer. Going into it, you know, again, the bike doesn't seem to have any binding or resistance when turning. So very, very, very good in that respect, very nimble. The brakes from the factory are adequate. I wouldn't say that they're the best, but they're definitely adequate for the size of the bike. And especially if the rider weighs less than 150 pounds, then obviously they're gonna work much better. You know, power delivery is obviously a little different. You definitely really notice the really short wheelbase on both the bikes. But let's make a quick comparison real quick because I have not done this yet. See now, front tires. So they do have about the same wheelbase, but for some reason the EBOX feels like it has a shorter, even shorter wheelbase. I don't know what that comes down to, if it's the tire, if it's where the weight is located on the bike. I haven't yet to figure that out yet, but it definitely feels like a shorter wheelbase when you're doing a wheelie and you hit balance point. I mean, you're ready to flip off the back of the bike pretty quick. To where on the Tuttio, maybe it's just the seat itself, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, definitely been enjoying both bikes, and I would recommend either. It's just more so, what is your preference? What are you gonna do with it? How are you gonna ride it? Where are you gonna ride it? It all comes into play. You know, the 60 volts obviously going to be better for if you want to go faster and have a little bit more power. So if you're going to, you know, want to hit jumps, you're going to need speed to hit jumps. So you're going to want the extra voltage. In comparison to the Tuttio, I have a very hard time getting a run up quick enough to hit jumps on that. To where the EBOX definitely has plenty of power to get you up to speed enough to get some air. And then another thing with both these bikes is they have very skinny rear tires, and they're very left to right. Like the balance is really hard to get from side to side. If it wasn't fighting me so hard, I mean, it'd be so much easier to wheelie this bike because it wheelies so good. It's just, it definitely needs a wider rear tire. Not by much, but you know, half an inch would make a huge difference in this bike. I mean, there's zero complaints from each bike. They just have their own places.
Again, I'm a beginner, so the Tuttio is just so easy to control. Not hitting the brake. You know, the balance point for me is just, it's just really easy to find on this one.
With the 48 volt, you really have to work for that front tire to come up, to where the EBOX, you can just pull up the front tire with just power alone. You don't have to pull back on the bars. I mean, a lot of it comes down to what you're gonna do with it.
Yeah, you really have to like get your throttle control dialed in to get this thing to stay up. It's a more substantial bike. It feels like it has more durability in a weird way. If you have more experience, you'll know what to do with this. They're both good.
It always comes down to what are you going to use it for? Are you using it to learn to stunt? Are you using it to ride it around the neighborhood? Are you using it on a dirt track? Are you trying to hit jumps? Are you just trying to make the fastest lap possible around the track? You know, all these things come into play when you're deciding on what bike to get, and the power level is really the biggest difference between the two.
Sometimes you're gonna want to ride the Tuttio, and sometimes there's days where you want more power, right?